but for this purpose, we would just pick our F drive. Now we have different schedules here, which are going to be familiar to you, to those of you who have been running backups for a while. Most SMBs today are going to be running some type of similar schedule, where it's a hardware-based system, and it's running a full backup every week and incrementals throughout the week. The reason for this is rather historical and sometimes still not even needed, depending on the software you're running. This was done because the legacy way to restore a full image would be to individually recover the full and then each sequential incremental backup until you get to the point that you want to get to. So this running incrementals every 60 minutes would be a non-option if it weren't for the advancement in technology today. So what we're using is something that makes it very simple, and you don't really need to go on a schedule like this any longer. In fact, it's recommended that you just go to the continuous incrementals. You run a full backup maybe once a quarter, once a year. You just manually run it, and then you just run incrementals from that point on. The system is intelligent enough to daisy chain the incrementals in the correct order and do that recovery for you. So it's very nice, and it really saves you time in all that management. So the bulkiness of a weekly backup of switching out drives, switching out tapes, pretty much comes to a stop when you go to a continuous incremental backup system. And it also allows you to have a more regular online backup schedule as well. Because a full image of a system, right now if you go to our website, we have a speed test section, and it goes through about an hour per gig of data. And that's at a file and folder level. And the encryption and compression levels, those are nonlinear processes. So as file size increases, the resources and time needed to crunch these larger files grows exponentially, which is why, again, it's good to have good RAM on your staging machine. But with this system, you back that full backup once, and then it's just incrementals. And incrementals for most servers are no more than maybe a couple gigs per day. If we're talking about every 60 minutes, you're probably looking at 11 files that are less than half a gig. That means your daily backups are going to be super quick. You could probably even follow up with the online backup of that incremental right afterwards, although you'd be pushing it a little bit. But it would happen so quickly. You'll see as you get in store. There are so many variables with the time and resources needed for backup that once you really start getting through that initial backup, you'll start seeing what kind of, how far you can push the RTO and RPO of this system. Got a couple questions on here. One from Anthony. I am following along and just installed Bare Metal Image Creator. When I restart the server, can't do it now. Is a Bare Metal Image Stream a separate application to download? Yes, and we're going to get to that right after we create this image. And then Doug says, sweet, smiley face. I agree. Tim says, I have clients in several countries, in country-specific backup locations where your servers automatically store data in the appropriate country. How does the user define where the data may not be stored? No, there is no setting that you yourself can do. It's very limited. You basically have to choose which data center you want your customers to go to. So there are different levels in our system. There's a CTC, which is one level, and then there's an entity. Each one of you are your own entity. Data or backup accounts can only be assigned to a specific geographic region per entity. So if you have an operation where you have needs for, say you have clients that need to have their data in Canada and need to have their data in the US, your whole rollout of this is going to be much busier looking. You're going to need essentially two separate entities. So come talk to us about that afterwards if that's where you're falling in. But as far as the intelligence of the software and where it's going to back up initially, it'll go to the nearest data center first. So we're interested in saving money, and that's going to save us some money. So it's going to go to the nearest data center first and then replicate elsewhere. So it really only becomes an issue if both of your client sets have specific needs to stay in a specific country. Okay, so the continuous incremental, this is the recommended way of going about it. You create one full backup every year or every quarter, and then just do incrementals from then on. And this makes your online backup of incrementals a lot easier. And use VSS. I'm going to let John talk about VSS and how this affects your system versus other programs.
So the use VSS option in there, that's, of course, ShoutProtect uses VSS to create its backups. And what that's doing is if you were to uncheck that box, it would be saying, hey, I don't want to use VSS. I just want to create an image of my backup, and I want to make it to where it can be crash consistent. So if it's turned off, you're not going to get any transaction consistent backups of databases. You're not going to be able to back up certain open files properly. So I know it's kind of goofy that there's a button there to uncheck it, but it is there for some people that want to use it. An example of that is that ShoutProtect can back up a Windows 2000 server, but it doesn't have VSS, so it would be a crash consistent image instead of transaction consistent. So that's the VSS thing. So usually you leave them checked. It's good.
Yeah, and it's important that a lot of systems out there, there's a comparison grid that you can look at on the managedonlinebackup.com website. It just says program deck. And that was the faux web integration package we went through. And that has a good feature comparison guide that goes through different services and what's happening. And there are a lot of services out there that haven't yet fully moved into a server solution like we have, that are running simpler crash-consistent backups. And it's really important to know that if you're running image-based backups on open databases and running systems, that it needs to be transactionally consistent, or you're putting yourself at a tremendous risk of losing information upon each recovery. Meaning, if we got Doug and Anthony, and Doug's going to buy a boat from Anthony for $1 million. The transaction comes in a pair. It's money comes out of Doug's account and goes into Anthony's account. A crash consistent backup, it means that it's going to the database is going to be running, and it's going to just cut a knife right through whatever's happening in the system. So it's possible that that snapshot occurs right in the middle of that transaction between Doug and Anthony. So possibly the money's out of Doug's account, not in Anthony's account. No one knows where it is. That's bad for business, especially if business involves that boat or $1 million, which it does. The transactionally consistent backup will negotiate with what's happening on the server. It'll say, hey, do you have any transactions in queue? Say, yeah, we're in the middle of this thing. We're going to pause it real quick. Okay, great. I'm going to take a snapshot as soon as you're done. Snapshot happens, then transactions continue. And that happens in a matter of seconds. So it's just a nice intelligent system to have in place to make sure that you can run backups, especially the incremental snapshots, and not worry about losing a lot of information. Okay, so moving right along, we now have compression methods in here, so non-standard high. Standard with system images or system volumes, we typically see about a 50% compression rate. But again, that's going to, as compression does, it depends on what types of files and what type of server you're talking about. If you have a bunch of videos and a bunch of images on a server, then you wouldn't need to, you wouldn't expect to get that level of compression. If it's just a database, it's just some sort of transaction database, it's all numbers, then that's going to compress a lot. So same thing like your PST file. If your person's using your PST file as a file transfer system rather than just email, then it's not going to compress as much as someone who has a proper file manager like SOS Collaborate. Compression locally, so this is to set compression and passwords for your local images. Not recommended if you plan on taking it off-site. So if you can avoid it, we do recommend it, as it will increase the speed of your off-site backup when it comes to the local procedures. But you can choose to encrypt this at a 128-bit RC4, 128-bit AES, or 256-bit AES. A lot of people just like having that password protected, maybe just at the RC4 because it's fast and it's at least A level, and then you have our security taking up the rest of it. But we recommend just not doing it at all. Encrypting encrypted files does take a little bit more time. So you just be aware of that. We have different commands you can run: pre-snapshot, post-snapshot, post-backup. So let's say you have some type of proprietary database that's running, and you need to tell it to pause transactions before the snapshot happens. Go ahead and run a batch file here that lets you do that. Those of you who are comfortable doing that sort of thing, have a ball. Go for it. Do whatever you like. Those of you who are a little simpler, maybe you just want to do a restart. Maybe you don't want to do anything at all. No big deal. But it gives you the option here. There's also the option here below for splitting images. And again, splitting an image, typically you wouldn't need to do it unless you had a server that had, unusually large incrementals. Splitting an image helps sometimes. So if you have like a 5 gig incremental, which would be pretty substantial, then maybe it would be a good idea to split it into maybe like a couple 1 gig incrementals, something like that for speed. It really depends. Our system, ImageStream, is designed specifically to handle terabyte image files to go off-site, so it's not really that big of a deal. But there are a few scenarios where splitting images is still relevant. So we hit next. Gives us a summary of what's going on. I'll hit finish. This is going to go ahead and kick off in another 30 minutes here. Now, we already have a lot of images or backup jobs running on this thing, so we're just going to go to restore. Well, actually, first, okay, we've created a job to back up. Now let's take it off-site. So we close this, and it gets into who was following along. Was that Anthony? So then you have bare metal image stream. So you'd select this and install that. Now, please remember that ImageStream and the online backup and recovery have the same use case, which is get files securely off-site or recover files from your off-site or from your online backup. It's just the ImageStream is specifically designed to handle larger server environments, whereas the online backup and recovery is more heavily branded.